By the way, I turned on the waiting. Hey guys.
Hello, I believe we are live. So welcome everyone to the third Vocaloid Appreciation. Oh, we're not live? Oh, okay, I heard an oops.
I'm sorry, I
um,
keep clicking the wrong one. Hold on, guys. I totally got this right now, okay?
I'm really confused right now.
I'm sorry. Okay, start over.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, oh, I oh boy, I'm looking at the delay of the stream.
Yeah.
Um, so welcome everyone again to the third Vocaloid Appreciation VATcast. And we have our special guest, Mr. Halfslashed. But you'll notice that he is not on the right side, as our special guests usually are. He's in the center, and that's because Halfslashed will be joining us as one of the core team members. Not to say that Nix is going anywhere, but it gives us more flexibility with scheduling if we have 3 people instead of 4 people. So yeah, we'll give him a chance to talk a little bit about himself.
Yep. Hey everyone. Halfslashed. You probably know me by that. I've been around in the OSU community for about 10 years. As of like July 1st or something like that, or August 1st. Can't remember. But either way, it's been a decade in OSU. I've been around in kind of every. I've put my fingers in every pot pretty much. So I was playing at one point on the leaderboards like most people do. Went into playing the tournaments, went into staffing tournaments, got into mapping, got into running community projects, and the rest is kind of history on that. Yeah, it's been a lot of years here. So most of you guys probably know me though for tournament stuff, in particular my contributions to Corsace. So I spent a lot of time there, kind of making sure that the project actually worked on the map pooling side, and have done a lot of stuff with custom mapping. So yeah.
Very cool. Definitely, I think a lot of people know of that Corsace name, and especially if they're not babies in Osu, they probably know you from that. Um, but yeah, so we just kind of want to talk a little bit, perhaps, about how you got to where you got in the community, right? How you got to doing tournament stuff, how you got into Corsace, how you got even into mapping, and became the figure that you are today.
Yeah, okay, so kind of what the jumping point I'd say between me just being somebody that just plays the game and somebody that actually is involved in the community was I saw a forum post for OSU Global Tournament 2. Sorry, no, I wasn't a forum post. It was on the main page of OSU. And so they were advertising a tournament, and I said, okay, this might be a good time to go in and try that out. And so I did. And then what ended up happening was that actually got me in contact with some other people into another tournament called Z Tournament. And so Z Tournament is a tournament, a tournament that ended up getting a badge and running, I think, in 2016 it got its first badge, 2017 it ran again, etc., etc. But this was the first iteration, and the host had no idea what he was doing. But I was playing in it, and I also wanted the tournament to succeed, so I kind of got involved on the staffing front there. And then I ended up re-meeting a team that I faced in OGT2, which had a guy that named underscore Tyler. Back then he was known as Sexual Tentacle, but this guy ended up after my team beat him. We ended up actually co-founding a monthly tournament series for 4 digits. So it was called SMT Monthly, and so we ran this for about 2 years straight. And so that kind of got me into the whole tournament sphere, where I was making map pools and commentating, etc. Actually, back then I was more of a commentator than a map pooler. So, but I ended up map pooling for kind of the once a yearly tournament we wanted to make called SMT Winter, and this is what kind of got me in contact with mappers, actually, since we were getting mappers like Evil Elvis and Okaradu to help us out. So this was kind of happening in parallel because as I was, staffing these tournaments, I was also playing tournaments, and I kind of was developing my niche as a, reading player. So I was making, I realized, of course, there's a huge deficit of low AR maps in particular because that's what I wanted, but they were considered relics of the past, so I wanted to actually try making new ones. And so that was kind of what led me to making my first map, which you may have heard of. It's called Demystified Feast. And that was kind of essentially I made that map, and then I was trying to like go through to get it ranked or whatever. Mapped a bit, especially doing collabs with like Garamok. And that actually gave me the ability to apply to the community mentorship program, which was starting, I think, cycle 2. So they opened out their applications. I don't think I got into cycle 1. I think I might have missed that, but cycle 2 had the opportunity to try. And yeah, so I did get in. And then from there, things really spiraled because it's like, all right, I knew Okaradu, and I knew I wanted to do stuff. And so Oko actually was like, all right, so this guy wants to do stuff. He can help out and be a helper. So this is very oversimplified, but that got me into mentorship. And then so once I was in mentorship, it's less like, and I was, meeting people that like both from the mentee side and also meeting the mentors from, being kind of a helper / organizer, which is what they're now called. That kind of got me into the mapping scene. And yeah, that kind of accelerated my mapping from there. So yeah, so that's the early side.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly even kind of forgot that you were a really important part of early mentorship. I mean, obviously you're pretty retired from that, but yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I think you even have your community contribution badge for mentorship. So
Yeah, that's right. It's like it feels so I mean it's been a long time, right? So that was in that time it was like Oko and Yui were the ones
Yeah.
running the program. But then Yui kind of dropped off the face of the earth, so then it was me and Oko that were running it for a couple years. And so especially like what I helped a lot was setting up most of the back end sheet infrastructure. And especially contests. So mentorship program runs a couple contests for its part for like the mentees, and I kind of set up the infrastructure for that and ran those for the duration of my time there. So that was solid 2 years. But yeah, that did end up getting me the contributor badge. So
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, it's a good time. And I think people really underestimate the value of just sort of integrating yourself in that mapping community, even not necessarily so much as a mapper, but like just integrating yourself there is going to do dividends for improving your ability to map.
in general, it's like that is kind of what makes mentorship. So I've heard a lot of people questioning the value of such a mentorship program. Does it actually help you map better? And like, will things actually like will it turn you into a god or whatever? It's just like, is it? But it's just the whole value is you're getting immersed into the community. You're interacting in a space with other people that are in there doing the same, going in similar-ish directions. So. And this, by the way, just is kind of like a preparation for, interacting with like BNs, for example. If you're trying to get your map ranked, well, wouldn't it help if you kind of knew the people involved, how they think, how they look at things, and how to interact with them, so that when you go and have a map and you're ready, you can go and ask for something. But in general, it's like I look back on my mentorship time, especially as a mentee, as some of my fondest times because I met some friends that like I've been around forever. Like I was in the same mentorship cohort as like LMT, Mir, Yasipo came the one after, Ice Call came like the one after that.
I know
Mun,
Moon was in
like
there, yeah.
yeah, like there are just like Defiance. Defiance is another one. Like there's so many people that I just like continued to interact with for years to come afterwards. So and it's just I it's sad in a way that due to the scale of mentorship it has gotten less and less of a like the thing is, it's still just dependent about the people there, right? So cycle 2 was considered like a super cycle because of the people there. That just kind of like happened to click and interact, and everyone's pushing each other to be better at what they're trying to do. And then it's like for a couple cycles after that, did not really see that. But I realized by cycle 7, the cycle I think with Uberzolik in it, we start seeing that different cycles, different social things. It just takes like a couple people to click, and then now everyone's talking, everyone's moving, and actually mapping and doing all that fun stuff. So
Yeah, I definitely think that. I mean, the program has grown over the years, obviously, and I know like those early cycles were relatively small compared to what we have today, and much more tight knit. Like nowadays, it's pretty. Everyone's pretty separate, so a lot of those mentees don't really interact as much anymore, which is kind of a disappointing outcome, I guess, because it's that interaction and pushing each other and learning from each other, and passing that knowledge around. That's a really important part of overall improvement.
but at the same time, it's like you guys have these you guys have all these new systems. Like you got like the roast before post or whatever, or like these map posting channels that kind of like facilitate this interaction, and I see they are getting used. And I think also just like the public nature of the some of the channels now has kind of helped. I remember at first, I was very skeptical that this was going to work and be productive, but it did seem to help things. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can credit Yaspo for that one.
Yeah, I mean, it like to get anything just in general, like when you want to improve something, you really have to care for it. And Yaspo is like, he reaped the fruits, he put the fruits back. Like that's kind of how it works. And it's the same with me. It's the same with Mir. It's the same with like all of us. Like started as mentee, became like helpers/organizers, and then continued to drive the program forward. Like it's the same with all of us. Like
I think Nafi is the only one here that didn't really do that. Like I don't think Nafi went through the program. So
What?
Oh, you went through the program yourself?
I was in the separate Taiko mentorship when it first started out before it got merged into the main one. And I remember when I became a VN, this was really funny. I also joined as a mentee in the mentorship like 3 days later because I could not, and I still kind of cannot, really map like extras and stuff, or my approach to mapping was kind of like so strict on myself. I wasn't quite having fun. So I became the mentee of Arthanagon a couple of days after I started being a VN. So that was one that made the organizers be like, "Are you sure about that?" And in the end of the day, besides mindset, I didn't learn too much from him directly. I just wanted to be in the server because it was all closed off unless you were a mentee or a mentor. So I was like, "Can you help me get in the server? I can't be a mentor, so obviously I have to be a mentee."
oh my gosh,
That's funny.
that gives the same energy as like Hollow Wings being a Mania mentee. Like that's crazy stuff.
Yeah, sometimes you see some funny things.
I was in there. I was socializing, and that was pretty big for me. But
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah. I mean, on the actual like mentoring, like my mentee experience. All right. So here's the thing. So I don't know. This might be a shock to some of you, but actually, do you guys know who my mentor was?
I think it's Mr. Sergio, right?
You are correct.
Oh
So
my
Mr.
God.
Sergio, aka Seijiro, so former GMT, and I'm not sure how familiar are you guys with his mapping style.
not as
Not at all.
maps, but I learned a lot about modding from lurking in the forums, and there was just this one period of time where he was just posting on literally like every pending map on the forums. So I was just going through and reading all of his mods.
Yeah, so yeah, that's kind of essentially our commonality. It's like our kind of focus on modding, like because both like first of all, for a long time, I think especially for probably the first, I don't know, until about 2020, I definitely considered myself more of a modder than a mapper. And it's like even in the way I mapped, with how much I would essentially just like critique myself and like remap certain parts to get the finished product, definitely kind of incorporated that in. So it's like that's also kind of the reason why like one of the ways that me, like Mir, LMT, etc., got along so well, because I was always there being the feedback machine. So like Sergio was doing that on the forums, I was doing that in Discord. I was Discord modding like day in, day out, like log in, roast a map, because Mir, for example, was mapping at the speed of Mir, and so that's like a map
So
a
true.
day.
Yeah.
It's just like, so Mir will post some shit, I will roast it, and then next day, and we'll keep doing that for just like years. So like Mir, Mun, like Defiance, like all these like people, just the LMT, like we'd all it's just like roast. So I was getting really good at modding because I was looking at everyone's maps, but not spending that time into mapping because I did not like mapping. So that actually made, I feel like that actually made it harder. Because so those guys, these guys, they could, autopilot, just like lock in, just make these maps, and then for me it was just like, wait, I can tell how bad all this is, and so I'm like, it's taking me like, these guys to map 5 seconds, it takes me like 30 minutes, and meanwhile these guys have already finished like half a map. So you can see that in the speed mapping contests. If you dig back into the archives, you'll find like my entries. Let's just say I did not ever finish any of those. And boy, they were not good, to say the least. Like, so yeah, but yeah, it's like that was kind of our overlap. But I still wonder if, because when I submitted my map for my Menti application, I submitted a collab between me and Daramok, and I wonder if, I still don't know if Sergio actually looked at my parts or he thought that I was Daramok, because Daramok was way better than me. So, but he also got in that cycle, so he got in under Elvis, which is kind of cool and fitting for his style. So. But yeah, it's like, as far as what I feel like my kind of takeaway from that was kind of what the meta is. Because what I'd started to do, like the types of maps that I was trying to make and wanted to see, were not exactly something that was accepted in the time I was learning the map. So this is 2017, which I consider the most restrictive era of mapping. Just from a systemic perspective. It was just trying to do anything off of the norm was severely like punished. And so like I kind of learned kind of what the standards of, especially like aesthetic focused mapping were. And honestly, when I figured this out, I still remember being really mad. I was like, this is it. This is what like people are being gatekept by. This is what I was getting gatekept by, and I was just like, all right, we got like, I know now the game, so I guess we'll just do this and then slowly deviate until I can get back to the stuff I actually wanted to do. So
Yeah, I mean, I always find it funny when people like these days complain about, the mapping meta being stale, or like, certain things being repressed, and I'm like, well, clearly you weren't around in, the 2010s when you had like Lockdown running around and stuff.
yeah.
Because I mean, these days the ranked section is pretty well diversified, and really just about anything could get ranked. Obviously, I find 2BNs, but that's not changed, right? And if anything, the BN, I mean, we had Lasse just resigned because he feels the BNG is oversaturated, right? So it's easier than ever, I think, to get just about anything into that ranked section. But
I mean, so yeah, you have the amount of people in the BNG, and you just have like the reduction of systemic barriers. Because again, like 2017, like let me remind you guys what was going on. So you had a very dominant like social hierarchy for status quo preservation. In particular, they wanted to preserve generic maps as much as possible. So you had that. You had the QAT kind of enforcing that. And the QAT enforced this by means of the BN tests, and just in general BN moderate. They heavily control the amount of BNs going in. Where we're talking, there is once or twice a year, it's kind of like the Hunger Games for selecting the BNs, where they would put out this test, which was heavily slanted towards the preferences of the test creators. And then, that's the only time the community can apply to be a BN. And then on top of that, they reintroduced tiering, aka they brought back MAT-BAT split via tier 1 and tier 2 BNs. So you had tier 1 BNs, tier 2 BNs. You had very few opportunities for BNs to even apply in the first place, even less to be able to learn what the heck was going on with the test makers. And then you had the QAT on top of that. And even though they couldn't directly enforce things like they could in 2015 with like asymmetry type of stuff, they just enforced it in this way instead. So it never stopped, it just went under the rug.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but it was fun. It was fun though. It's like eventually I did get to where I wanted. Because it's like through mentorship. I alluded to this earlier. Like I met people that I got to interact with other mentors and like mentees and people that knew them. Like I met Undead Capulet, which was a big influence for me in 2017, 2018, etc. And though not exactly going the place I wanted to go, I learned a lot, probably a lot more than if I had just interacted with the people that knew what the meta was. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, for even if you don't necessarily want to map like Undead Capulet or whatever, like the things that you can learn from people who map differently from you, it's a lot. You can learn a lot from that and that different perspective, and it's something that I've also benefited from.
Yeah, I think I remember you mentioned you were like the happy medium between Undead Capulet and Mun. Was that it? Like,
No, not Mun. Well, I said that I was like that I liked both sort of Mir, because I was mentored by Mir formally, not like unofficially, but like so not through the mentorship program, but like I was, he recognized me as his official mentee, and then I was unofficially mentored by, or like assisted by Undead Capulet, and so I sort of have a lot of those, like both of those different preferences and sort of the ways I think about things. And as a result, that's kind of why I think that Celery is one of my favorite mappers, if not my favorite, because I feel like Celery is like right in between both Mir and Undead Capulet.
yeah, for me, it's like I mean, I was I was influenced, of course, but not so much in the direction. The direction that I wanted to go in never changed. Which is also probably why I don't think Undead Capulet ever liked a single one of my maps ever.
I feel
And
that.
but the way essentially I didn't have the like tools to get to where I wanted to go, and I wasn't gonna get them from the people that were just of the meta. So
Right.
Undead Capulet really showed me how to look at maps in a different way, and that actually did get me to where I wanted to go, even if it's not like I wasn't never gonna go the same direction. Though I did entertain it. Like I mean, I have a lot of maps that attempted to go in that direction as far as I could like reasonably go in that. I think like a good example of this is Graveyard and Lake, if anyone's ever seen that one. So that's probably the closest that I've gone into that sort of Undead Capulet type of direction. So
Yeah, I definitely have yet to make a map that UC ever liked. So
yeah,
but, oh well.
I long gave up on that. I've been able to sleep better
Yeah.
a lot ever since.
Yeah, same. I was after a while I realized like, yeah, this ain't happening. Same thing I think with Mir. I don't think Mir ever liked my maps either. And I was never sort of generic enough, or I never wanted to be so quote unquote like generic to in along the lines of Mir, right? I kind of wanted to find a middle ground where the maps were interesting and engaging, but didn't look like they were, thrown together haphazardly. That I think so, like trying to find that middle ground, and yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, for me, it was the opposite. So Mir actually liked my maps, but I didn't like Mir's maps for a long time. And it didn't change until Mir started to kind of loosen up his style. because the mirror that I knew had a very rigid style.
Yeah,
And in
once got
particular,
inspired for sure.
it was just it didn't involve as much mechanic utilization as I like in my maps, so I was always finding them boring. And so it wasn't until something like I think it was Keck, yeah, the false noise song that he mapped, and that was the first one where I'm like, okay, he's finally now doing stuff that I like. He almost had it with Labyrinths, which was actually one of his very early maps in like 2017. But then essentially Yui modded out the part that I actually liked, which were these gigantic space triples, and I was just really disappointed. Yep. And I'm just like, all right, well, this is gonna suck.
Darn.
Rest in peace.
Yeah,
Don't you love it?
Oh yeah, no, I've seen it before. I definitely like. I was like, no, don't mod out. That's the interesting part. No, don't do that. I feel that so hard. And you know what's crazy is like those kinds of things early on in mapper careers really do change the course of that mapper for a very long time. Like
Yeah.
mounting out sort of things that maybe are not executed well, but are more interesting. And if you mod it out because it's not executed well, rather than, you know, sort of praising it for the good idea or the good attempt, then it's like, well, now that you're setting the mapper up to just be boring.
Well, it's because like when they're maybe, you know, like they'll internalize it as like the laws of mapping instead of being like
Yeah.
more confident in themselves and being like, no, I like this idea.
Well, part of the problem is that just in general, people really suck at modding. A lot of people are kind of too selfish when they look at maps. They really want to make the map what they want to see into as opposed to what the mapper wants to see. So I think it takes in general, it takes a lot of humility on the modder's side to understand that this other mapper is not going where you are going necessarily, and it's kind of your job to help them along as much as you can. So
Yeah,
and if you can't do that, then you're counterproductive. You're getting in the way.
Yeah.
I mean, even on a
words.
very basic level, that's something people struggle with. Like, I'll see in VN applications a lot. Like, you know, somebody will go off on this map, and they're like, this isn't following the drums, this isn't following the drums, this isn't following the vocals, what are you following? I don't understand.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, the mapper was just mapping the guitars the whole time. And that's before you even get into more complicated issues about, like, why did they choose to place things that way? Why do their patterns work the way they do? And it's just like, oh man.
So back when I don't know if this is the case now because obviously I haven't dealt with the BN application side of things in a long time. But back in my day, back in my day, we had this issue where you kind of had to present yourself in a different way because again, it was like for a while before you had the tests, and when you had the tests, you were modding in a way that the test makers would be able to grade positively. But that doesn't necessarily reflect how you'd actually mod. And for a long time, BN applications were the same way. It's just like, oh, it's just a different form of a test. It's a much better test because it allows more subjectivity and it allows more critique. But fundamentally, you're still checking boxes. And I know that there's been many attempts to improve this over the years in the NAT. So I just don't know how far this actually gotten through. So yeah.
I mean, I would imagine that it's still somewhat that same approach. I mean, realistically, you're doing a test, right? So you're going to tailor what you do to what you believe the evaluators are going to like, right? And you know, I think the thing that most people disliked about the test, and it's a little bit better now because of the changes, but was having to mod maps that had issues in the first place, because realistically most BNs don't mod maps that really have significant issues, because it's just, you know, if you're not going to nominate the map because it has issues, then you're not going to mod it, right? And so you were forced to like do that, which, you know, I know in my experience, if I mod a map that I don't like, I'm much more likely to find issues with things that aren't necessarily issues, but somebody else might like, and whereas I would see it as an issue. So I try not to mod those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to. Like now, the application process, to my knowledge, involves you basically now are kind of modding things. You're modding things in the way that you would as a nominator, which is a lot better. So that's like more specificity. And just in general, like the thing with when the thing that I was mentioning on the strictness and the checkboxy nature of things was that, for example, you would be modding. Oh, hey, like you're not mapping the drums here, and this is bad because sometimes like it was such that the evaluators would actually have the same bias and they would mod it the same way, and that would reward you. So you'd be able to break a map, and then you'd still get in because you're like looking for the things that the evaluators wanted. But now, if the evaluators are now looking at more abstract things like, oh, are you actually like paying attention to what the mapper was actually in the map and tailoring your
Yeah.
feedback relative to it? If you're checking that box as opposed to, hey, this person is mapping like this person is trying to do like vocal heavy stuff and they're not mapping enough drums, but the evaluators like drums, so we're gonna mod these maps to have more drums in them, like things like that.
I mean, I
So
definitely think that the NAT has. I mean, I wasn't really around in like the 2017 era, but I definitely think I haven't really felt afraid to mod things that I don't personally like, as long as I am properly justifying that, because then I'm arming the mapper with one, why I believe it, rather than just trying to force it down their throat. And I think the NAT recognized that, and like as long as you justify your opinion, right, your perspective, and you're not trying to force the mapper to do it, then generally that's not going to be seen as necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you're completely off base, right, then it's like, okay, well, you're clearly don't have the knowledge, but generally a lot of things are, some different things can work, right, and so sometimes I'll see things that are like, this could have been a more interesting, or this I think would fit better with what you're trying to do in the map, and the mapper can obviously reject that if they don't agree. But
yep. It takes a long time for improvements like this to trickle through. That's why we're talking this on the basis of how, wow, this has changed in the last 8 years, as opposed to, wow, this is a change instituted by the NAT last year. Let's see how it's affected things. Like, it takes so long, and especially since cohorts are moving in and out of, like, the active mappers, active modders, active BNs, or whatever. Like, it changes, that cycles on, like, 2-3 year cycles. And usually, for example, it's a lot of them carry a lot of their beliefs throughout the time that they are active and in positions of power, and that makes things hard to change until the next cohort comes in. So you have all those dynamics kind of playing out, and so change takes a while.
absolutely, I know Nafi's been around for many of them.
A few.
A few. Yeah, I mean, perspectives obviously change over time, and everyone's constantly learning. I mean, over my mapping history, my perspective on mapping has changed so much. I mean, I remember being a new mapper, joining and thinking that Monstrado was the greatest mapper of all time, and nothing would ever beat them. And now, and I couldn't even. I remember hating slightly curved sliders. I remember thinking that they looked like they were soggy.
What?
Yeah. And now I use slightly curved sliders all the time. So
This is logic agent battle propaganda, like.
So like it's kind of crazy. Like the more experience you get, and the more you expose yourself to different perspectives, I think it's kind of crazy how much your perspectives on things can change. Like I just always think about like how I could never have appreciated undead Capulet maps in 2020, and now I do. So
It's funny for sure.
I would say I would also not have appreciated your maps, Halfslashed, in 2020.
Honestly, I was very surprised when I started to actually get positive feedback on my maps. Because like it's one of those things I'm like, yeah, like everything when people talk about mapping, right? And you're around there talking about mapping, and they're pointing out things that they don't like. I'm just like, wow, this is like all the stuff that I put into my maps. But it turned out to be very like when like we'd act like if I actually showed a map to people, some of these people, they'd actually start talking about the merits. So like, okay, I'm a little confused. If like you hate all this, but you like what I'm doing, like what's going on here? So yeah, it's really weird. So still it took me a long time, I think, for me for that to catch up, because like there's the part of the Dunning-Kruger curve where you're like, or I saw this other graph where it's just like your skill does not match like your perception of your own value, and so they'll be out of sync all the time. And for a long time I was in the whole like, okay, I'm much better than I think I am. And I think it took like until probably like 2022 for me to actually realize that, like, okay, I actually am like pretty good.
I mean, your mapping style is definitely polarizing. You know, when you interact in the community, some people will say you're a really good one. Some will say you have, you know, an interesting style. So,
Yeah, I
but
realize this comes down to values
yeah.
a lot of the time. So
it does for sure, and that's the struggle that I think a lot of new mappers run into. Is like, you really have to know what you have to kind of know what your goal is, right? Like what kind of map that you want to create, and then ask the people who can help you get there, right? If you just
Yeah.
ask anyone, you're not going to necessarily get the feedback that gets you to your goal. And so a lot of people don't realize that necessarily. And obviously, you know, fundamentals are fundamentals, right? But there's a lot less sort of objective fundamentals than people really think there are.
yeah, I kind of agree with that. But yeah, it's like on the topic of the values and such, I will say a lot of the people that critique my maps, that also map, make things that I consider abominations. So it really that's kind of how it's like you get the whole value mismatch thing. It's like, okay, wow, so you hate my maps because I fundamentally don't care about a part of mapping the same amount that you do. And like there's a mismatch. It's not even just like, oh, I don't
Right.
care about this thing that you care about, but you care about the thing that I care about. It's usually inversion. Like I've run into this very commonly. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about mapping is you got to ask for feedback from people who value similar things to you, because otherwise you're going to get feedback that doesn't match what your outcome is or what desired outcome is, right?
More
Yeah,
people need to
and
realize that, because, like, you know, sometimes I'll like read the mentorship applications, right? And I won't just read my own. I'll read the ones that like apply to other people, and I'm like,
Right.
why are you applying to this guy? His map style doesn't match your favorite maps or your maps or anything.
Right.
as someone who's been part of those like roasts, like, because I remember like when I was reviewing applications and such, like we talk about this stuff all the time. I
Yep.
still remember that they it's just like that's just where they are in their mapping journey. Like just to give you an idea, like when I'm pretty sure like in 2015, when I was when like in my favorite mappers list was like Cherry Blossom, and it's like you would never ever think that I would like Cherry Blossom from a mapping perspective. But Cherry Blossom was there because Cherry Blossom was mapping songs that I liked, and made maps that I like to play, and all of that. And so they just haven't really started to look at maps in the same way that they need to actually like figure out who would be good to show them along where they want to go. So that's
Mhm.
really what it is. It's just it's inexperience to the point of like lack of self-awareness. So
Definitely. Yeah, it's something. It's definitely something. But if we skip kind of ahead, Halfslash, I understand that you're kind of on the retirement track right now.
oh yeah, that's right. So I've tried this a couple times, right? I was supposed to you would never you were never supposed to hear from me after summer of 2018.
Well,
A little early to retire.
Well, okay. So the story is, so I was actually, I was a BN and then I got kicked due to politically motivated actions. But you guys are all used to like having like if BN evaluations for BNs that are currently active and doing stuff.
Mhm.
So here's the thing. Back then there was no such thing. But there was this other thing called the QAH, so Quality Assurance Helper, because what was happening was that we were starting to get unrankable issues in qualified much with higher frequency. Um, and in general, this started to prompt a new look at the BNs that were active. It's like maybe we should start evaluating them for errors. The problem is that this wasn't communicated, and at the same time, there was no like discretion being applied to the types of maps. So, songs that are safer, were ones where there were less timing changes, less snapping things, less chances for errors. So, think your like standard J-pop song, J-rock or whatever, consistent, snap, everything's like one half, one fourth, like there's no weird stuff. Um, they're essentially those maps would have lower error rates compared to the stuff that I was nominating, which is I was nominating swing, I was nominating stuff with timing changes, I was nominating stuff with 1/6, like all this weird stuff. And so my error rate was higher because that's what I was pushing, but that wasn't accepted. And so they put the system and they're like, all right, we're just gonna look at people with DQ, like people with this many DQs and pops or whatever, and everyone below a certain threshold is either going to get probation or they're going to get kicked. And so there was a vote between it's like, okay, do you probation or do you kick Halfslashed? And it was like a very split decision. I think it was like I think they had to actually get a tie-breaking vote. Like it was like 3 in favor of keeping me as on probation, and then 4 in favor of kicking me, and so I got kicked. So of course, if you look at the panelists, this wasn't done on just the objective metrics or the realization of the situation. It was like, okay, they did not like me because of the attention that I was getting by nominating some really controversial maps. To give you an idea, like I nominated Deal with a Double and Rendezvous in 2018. That pissed off a lot of QAT. Just to put it lightly. I mean, one of them, had a meltdown so bad that he did this spite map that lives in infamy. Got kicked from the QAT because of it, and now we got a new, much better QAT in their place. So just saying. But yeah. So that I was like done with the community. But then a hurricane hit the town that I was working in, and I had no internet for 10 weeks of that.
Holy cow.
And so I was so bored, I had nothing to do other than to try to map. And so that's how Chire was born.
Dang.
Yeah.
10 weeks of that internet.
Yeah. And that kind of gets into the we'll get to the retirement bit because this is important context since Chire got me back into the community, and around that same time they were like Vinxis was getting together stuff in Corsace, because someone that I was talking to almost daily, even despite being gone, was Uberzolik, and Uberzolik got invited to Corsace. And so now that I'm like, I uploaded a map and I'm like kind of back or whatever, Uberzolik told me, it's like, hey, you want to join this thing? And I'm like, yes, this is in fact exactly why I started mapping, even though that's not what I've been doing for the past year or whatever. This is why I started mapping. So I got invited to be one of the initial custom mappers for Corsace Open 2019. It was 2019 at the time. So this was the first time that Corsace ever attempted to do a full custom tournament. But it was, I mean, they didn't have much of a clue. Like we got through the first year, so we only had like 30 maps when we needed 120, something like that. So, but during this time, I was also trying to take it over because I realized, hey, I'm finally doing the thing I actually always wanted to do, and we're trying to do this at scale, and let's just actually get it done. But it took me that year essentially to convince Kite, who was running the project, that I'm like, he doesn't have what it takes to finish it. Like, I know he cares, but it's just whatever's in his life is stopping him from getting there. So I'm like, all right, look, I have a job that I don't have to care too much about, and I have passion, and I'm like, I'm gonna fucking do this. So 2020, I was now head of Corsace. I took it over, and I got it done. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
and then so I just kept getting it done for the next year, and then tried to leave again actually in 2022, but that didn't work. So came back in 2023. This time I was, but then and then some shit happened, and then I was actually leaving in 2023. So 2023 was the last year I did Corsace, and that's what's kind of leading me to the retirement moment now. Because what I realized is if Corsace was not so present, I would have been gone probably by it. All right, I would have probably been gone by 2020. Because all my ties would have kind of died off. A lot of the people that I had been around had kind of stopped getting involved as much. Like Mir kind of went away. Like Mir was a big presence in my OSU career. And I think he kind of went away after some shit happened in one of the servers he used to run. So that happened. It's like LMT was kind of like moving on to doing other things, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the people that I kind of was, in the groove with were stopping. Undecapulated had gotten outed, like that entire group. Like they started to do their own things in their lives. Paths diverging, essentially. So, what I realized is with Osu, what keeps you here is the people. And once your paths start to diverge, there is kind of no reason for you to continue to stay, because that's the only reason to stay. So, what's happened especially in this last year is I realized, oh, now I'm like, most of the people that I interacted with are gone. They're not really active contributors in that way, and so it's kind of time for me to go. So,
Sick.
yeah.
And you're working on, I think, a couple different things for your retirement there.
Yeah, so I set out a list at the beginning of the year. I set out a list of stuff I was going to do, and I'm almost done with it. So one of those was I finished a map of Down's song. Down made a song named after me. I finished my map of that. So there is that exists. I had a
Did you not
couple.
know this, Nafi?
Oh yeah.
No.
Oh, it's a banger. It's a featured artist song. Because Down's a featured artist.
My
Yeah.
main impression of Down is when the My Love remix and mapping and storyboarding contest was going on, and he submitted this entry where he made his own remix. He made his own map, and the map was 5. And then he also made his own storyboard with all of his own art assets, and it was like, if it had an MS Paint opening. It was glorious. That is my
Okay.
main impression.
Okay, but you don't like. There's more to that. Like, I have a storyboard. I'm gonna link for you, Nafi. Like, there is Down made my favorite storyboard of all time, or one of them. It's on Arcana Force. So he made this back in 2018, and it is just the best. It is like a flash animation. It's amazing, and oh my god, it's just so good.
Let me see if I can open it up on my screen here without going to the wrong screen.
It's a banger. But yeah, anyway, so that was one of the things I was setting out to finish, because I'd actually wanted to do that as soon as he made the thing, but now I was like, but I was kind of burdened by Corsace. So now that I was unburdened by Corsace, I wanted to finish it. So I had that. I had a couple of sets that I'd wanted to rank for a while, like mostly some of my stream maps, I guess, that I hadn't ranked, like Resurrection, Darkest Night. Wanted to get those ranked. Yeah, now I've got a couple. I have a couple more sets. So, I've been waiting on a GD from Nixa actually for one of them, and Nixa's actually gotten something that he's kind of comfortable with. So that one will probably be moving soon. I have a set that I'm very proud of, that I've been waiting on a storyboard for, and now I'm actually at the point where I'm working on the particles for it, because a person who's helping me with this storyboard, the Duck Mask.
Oh, I love Duck.
Yeah. They've caught up. they had some issues going on, so they weren't able to do too much for the storyboard. But now it's like they finished like a lot of the assets and the design and all of that to the point where I can help out with particles. So now I'm helping out with particles, so that we're kind of in this together instead of just just like the one duck army.
Speaking of
So
storyboards,
yeah.
I got the down storyboard you mentioned playing on the stream.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's banger, right?
oh my god.
It is very much so like 2010 Flash animation.
It's banger.
This is so good.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm finishing up that storyboard and then can finally push that one. I know you've been waiting a while for that one, White, but it's actually happening. Like,
Hell yeah.
And then
Damn good map too.
I've got a bunch of words to write down. So I will finish writing those words. There may be videos associated with those. Who knows? Depending on my motivation. And then one last map, which I actually just finished the full set yesterday. So,
Nice.
yeah, and then you probably won't see me. You almost certainly won't see me in 2025 if things go according to how they look like they're going. But yeah, it's been a fun journey.
Heck yeah. And we can keep doing this and tell you all the drama that's happening while you're gone.
I think I'm good. It all just cycles back
darn.
to the same stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm like, it's just different actors. You
Same
can ping me
event,
with
different
lasers
face.
finally a thing.
I mean, laser's coming along slowly, very slowly. One day it'll be there. I think the thing is, I don't know if I said this on the stream yet, but the thing that I really hate the most about laser right now is that I can't force default skin hit sounds, which is quite annoying. So if your skin just doesn't have a hit sound, it just doesn't. It uses like the default like tacky sound or whatever. I don't know. It's annoying.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Laser. I can't map in Laser. They've been making so many great updates, but they're still missing one key thing. They're putting out so many updates, like every other week at this point right now. Super active development after it being sitting in like basically dead in the water for the mapping side for like 6 years. But you can't see a video or storyboard in the editor. How am I
That's
supposed to
crazy.
live?
That's crazy.
And like the other day, one of the maps with one of my storyboards was put on the daily challenge, so I was like, this is sick, I'm gonna go play it. And then it turns out my storyboard is broken in Laser, and I'm like, oh, I gotta make a bug report now. Thanks.
More work for me.
And now they're like, maybe this was written improperly, and I'm like, it's just a basic loop. What do you mean?
Yes, blame the mapper for the coding errors. That's a classic right there.
Yep.
Yeah, God, classic. Yeah, I keep hearing about the laser editor. It's getting more and more functional, but it's still not there yet. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just how it is, though.
But like, thinking about your retirement list, it's a little bittersweet because at some point I ended up being here forever. It doesn't really feel like it's been forever until I realized just like how many stages of cohorts I've lived through, and I like look at my friends list and there's like somebody that hasn't logged in 6 years, and I'm like, damn, okay.
Oh God, I have not even looked at that. I think I'll avoid that.
Yeah, avoid it. It's a bad idea.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like when you guys were looking at like my Twitch account, like I already got some of that memory lane. I'm like, oh my God, I remember that, and I'm like, that's I don't think about this anymore. So
I think most people don't think about themselves 10 years ago, and they're like, oh God, cringe.
It's just I was with a different crowd. That's all it was.
Yeah. Just different place in life, you know?
Yeah, I mean, bittersweet is kind of what it is, but like there is definitely a point where you've overstayed your welcome, and it's like it's kind of pain. It is sometimes you do need to move on at some point. Like if you stay around, then you can be like one of the bitter ghosts that's always around that is always sabotaging things for the newer cohorts. And I refuse to do that because I mean that was essentially that was the coming of Osu story. It was like fighting against these bitter ghosts dragging us to the past. And it's like now it's just you don't want to become the evil that you once fought, you know?
Don't live long enough to become the villain.
Yes, exactly. So
That's so
um
true.
but that's also just kind of like what I realized. One of the things I realized is like there is a point. Sometimes you do need that like pivotal experience that is just kind of makes you realize there is no future here for you. You need to leave. And it's never gonna be the one you think it is what I realized. It's like you what like I like for me, like I don't know. You work in like community stuff long enough, like as an NAT or whatever, and you're used to just getting railed by, you know, intervention from these ghosts of the past and or Peppy and or both, and it's like all these things you're working on to advance the greater good just getting stopped. That's like at a certain point you build a tolerance to that, but what you never expect is for the knives to come from like the inside, like the people that you're working with, like essentially just like willing to throw you away for their own status. That is to me
That's
the that
dark.
is if that ever happens to you, that is the time that you should go, because then it's like you're no longer in service, like the people that because if it's all for the people around you, that you're all, you know, trying to make things better for each other, that will keep you here for a long time. It'll keep you here until you're betrayed by one of them. So
Yeah, I'm sure Nafi can think of some scenarios for that.
yeah,
No, I usually just get
No?
messaged by people I haven't talked to in like 6 years, and they're like, "Hey, how's it been going? It's really cool to see you still around. Kind of see some people I used to talk to and get to catch up." And it's always really interesting, like getting to hear all the different stories of what people get up to when I haven't spoken to them in a while. And I think that's kind of nice. Like I get
Yeah,
to
I
meet a
mean,
lot of new people that are like really cool and doing a lot of cool stuff, and like there's just so many amazing people running like these really awesome projects that I don't really understand or know all the details of, and I'm just like always just so impressed by like all the people I get to meet. Sometimes once in a while somebody will come back and they'll have become like the most bitter and hateful person ever, and I'm just like, what happened? But like I don't take that personally. Like, you don't know exactly what happened since then, or what exactly is going on
Definitely.
with that, or exactly how they viewed things. Because, you know, sometimes I see things differently than other people do, and I don't realize it until it gets thrown at my face, and I'm like, I guess I'll take that one as a learning experience.
it's a good one. Yeah, I mean, I can usually meeting people where they are is important, but when they are just like when they fundamentally don't care about where you are, or about you, and they just want to use you for their benefit, then you can't work with those people.
Mm-hmm.
That's just unacceptable. So
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, I think, like, when you're in a different place from other people, you really do get different perspectives. And those perspectives change based on, like, sort of what position you have, right? Like, I remember not being a BN and thinking that, you know, it was so unfair that my maps weren't getting ranked when I was a new mapper, right? And then I became a BN and I'm like, wow, I really don't want to spend all my time modding these like mediocre maps. So it's kind of just like this, your perspective changes based on what experiences you have, right? And the different perspectives that you have in general.
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But anyway, Nafi, do you want to sort of, as like a PSA, is there any like important changes to like the ranking criteria or like NAT announcements you just want to like give a shout out to?
Things that would affect the average person. No.
No.
No. Let me
Sounds
see.
good.
We completely rewrote the. It's all very boring stuff, but we completely rewrote the metadata criteria again, right? And I was like one of the people that helped with the original write-up in like 2018. So it was interesting to see how much my perspective on how it should be read has changed since then. Because like before, it was very restricted into a very certain style of writing the ranking criteria. Like you gotta lay out your sentences like this. You gotta structure your grammar like this. You gotta explain why are you doing it like this. And for me, I was just following along with that back then. And then I look back at it when Oko started the rewrite last year. And I'm like, this could just be so much simpler. There's no reason to be pretentious about this. So we rewrote the whole metadata criteria. Now it's on its own page. It's wonderful. I'm sure Halfslashed sometimes has strong opinions about that. I've had my ears filled with that before.
I only have strong opinions when I'm made to care about it. If the metadata stays in metadata land and it doesn't impact my maps, I'm good. However, as a Toho mapper, metadata has been one of the pain points. I think your friend Annabelle, probably has some beef with me because of how little I care about metadata. And so she took it upon herself to correct me, made sure I was correct many times. So
hey, you gotta look it out for you then.
Yeah. Well,
I remember bubbling Happy's map, and then like 20 minutes later, Annabelle popped it for metadata.
Yeah.
It was like, what the hell?
Yeah. So what actually happened is Lucent, who frequently helps me out with my maps, actually just became a Toho metadata god as a result. So Annabelle made someone stronger. It wasn't me, because I fundamentally like
you couldn't care.
You can't get me to care more than that. Like, because I do care about metadata in my own way. Like, there are certain things I think you should do with Toho metadata, and I have my particularities with that, but not the things that others tend to care about. And so that causes conflict. And I try, but also I realize that, I mean, if I fundamentally don't care about something, I'm only going to get so far.
Right.
So then the rest is going to have to get filled in. So yeah, it is what it is.
For, right?
I just laugh at it. Obviously like Annabelle trying to make the best out of this, and anyone like Annabelle is trying to do what they're trying to get things to where they're trying to make things as good as possible. So I have like that realization. Obviously there's some frustration in the moment, but that's like the intentions are good. So I can only just like, you just gotta any negative part of that you just gotta deal with. So
yeah, I definitely don't have any issues with it, but it was just like really funny. I was like, oh wow. Immediately.
Yeah.
They were stalking it.
They know I'm a problem child.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely a problem child for sure. Out here causing so many issues for everyone. Goodness.
Oof.
Yeah, other than that, there's not really any like significant. Honestly, I feel like it was a very quiet month. I can't really think of anything like major that happened in general in the community.
Good.
Good. Quiet for once.
I might actually be able to enter a fan art contest for once. It's wonderful.
That's true. That is going on right now.
Because the spring one was in March, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to enter. And then they tried to nuke the whole NAT out of existence. And then a couple of months later, in like May, the next one comes around for the summer, and I'm like, I'm going to enter. I hope nothing happens in the next 2 weeks. And then the entire NAT explodes anyway. And I'm like, God damn it, I just want to enter the fan art contest.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't think this is a bad thing that there's nothing going on. This year has been insane. Like, even as much as as much as I like to say, oh, I've been around long enough to see everything, but like sometimes everything cycles through a little too fast, and this was one of those years.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there's been a lot this year, which is part of why it's like, oh wow, there's nothing going on this month, but it's also like, oh, finally, there's nothing going on this month. I think there was like the Sagan thing, but like that was it, and that was pretty tame in general. I mean, community just like overreacted for no reason to a veto that got, you know, didn't get upheld anyway. So
Yeah. I think it's become a bit of a trend now to like post about vetoes and stuff and like get more attention on them. Then half of the people reading them don't understand what they're looking at. And I hope that there can be a way to either change that or make it more understandable in the future, because the way that Sagan was treated by the community was horrible. Absolutely
Definitely.
unacceptable.
Oh yeah, something I have noticed is the level of aggression from the players, especially the quote unquote average players. They're not really average, but the loud players that have average tastes that are kind of but also don't know how mapping works. That has increased in incidents in the past couple of years for sure. So
Yeah, I mean, community's gotten larger and more polarized, and like sort of the platforms for getting that feedback, like mainly like Reddit and Twitter, have grown in sort of their use. So it's difficult. Yeah, it's rough. And you tend to see like those the loud majority, they go out there and they get upvoted, they get sort of seen by everyone, and people generally, people who don't know, tend to see that and think that that's like the majority opinion when it's really not. And
I
like you look
mean,
in the mapping community, and sure, most mappers didn't necessarily agree with Sagan's veto, but they also recognize that it was very unlikely to be upheld, right? It's like, okay, this is just a veto that's gonna get denied in mediation, and we move on with our day. But a lot of people have the perspective that vetoes are like the end of the map, and the NIT is conspiring to veto these maps, and it's just like, wow, this is like not at all how the system works, and you really overestimate how centralized the BNG is in general.
yeah.
yeah,
Although I think sometimes the same goes for how people view the community, because my average experience is I will go into multiplayer rooms on a relatively frequent basis. I would say my 70 to 100 plays a month are pretty lengthy because it's always in multiplayer. I don't get to retry ever. And they never have a clue, they're the average person is really just chilling, and they're like, this song is cool, I'll play it, thanks.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
That's very real. I do remember, like, I go back to my 2020 days when I was like, I had no idea what was going on. And, it was literally just like, I picked the song that I wanted to listen to, wanted to play. And if I could play it, it was a good map. If I couldn't play it, it was a bad map.
Yeah, this is actually an excellent segue into our main topic, because we're talking right now about this drama, but this drama to me is a symptom of something I refer as the player mapper divide. So this has been an issue that at least I've been aware of for a long time. And I recently, like in the past couple of months, I recently saw an excellent unlisted video on the topic. I'm linking it in our chat here. It's 3 hours long, so don't play this. But like in the description for the the VOD, I would link this for as further reading for those interested. But anyways, it's actually this was actually one of Nix's mentees that came up with this.
Really, I didn't know that.
Yes. So one of Nix's mentees came up with this, and they applied for mentorship to be a mentor with this as their supplemental material. So, this was a very insightful video because the mentee in question, Andrew RK, he is he's dabbled in mapping, and but he's mostly a Scylla player. And so he's able to have this perspective on the mappers versus players where he understands some of what the mappers care about, but not enough to be like, all right, now I'm fully detached from my player experience, which is what tends to happen actually in the mapping knowledge process. Like as you learn more about mapping, your perspective shifts, and now you're on a different side of the fence because you forgot what it was like to play. And or your experience with playing was actually more limited, and as a result of it being limited, it's entrenching certain biases that you have with mapping that make it harder for you to see other player perspectives. And yeah, it gets very, very fascinating topic. I will tell you that. So
Yeah, I think I've skimmed through it, obviously, but there's a lot there for sure, and I didn't think it was bad by any means. I remember, you know, we definitely had a conversation about it behind the scenes.
yeah, it's just one of those things of like mappers versus players. Like fundamentally, the issue is that investment to become good at either of them has gone up like a ton, and so now people don't have the time to be good at both. Like in the past, and in games like the Tycho Catch Mania, you still see like a lot of the people that are really good at being players are also really good mappers, right? But in Osu, that has not been the case. Because of just the complexity of mapping in Osu versus that of the simpler like VSRGs, horizontal like HRS, the horizontal scrolling games. I can't think of that acronym off the top of my head, but yeah,
SRG.
those games are simpler to just by design, thus simpler to chart. The visual component to Osu makes it much more complicated to map. Thus raises skill floor and even skill ceiling, I'd say, for getting into it. Meanwhile, playing this game with its complexity has gotten so like the ceiling has gone insane. Like I mean, the stuff that the top players are doing now compared to the top players in like when the PP system was introduced, gigantic. And also, yeah, the PP system has had a hell of an effect. So you have a couple of forces of investment and then PP, and that's causing a divergence in that. So mappers still, on average, are the same skill level before they start playing or switch to being completely mapper focused. And in general, a lot of the people that become mappers, because we're talking about averages, on average, they're not that good at the game. And so, because on average, they're not that good at the game, what they think makes a good map gameplay wise is pretty narrow because they did not get good enough at certain things. And that led to those biases I was talking about earlier, where you have like a bunch of where you essentially have these status quo bias of everything needs to be simple. Like if you're using these weird mechanics, then you're making a bad gameplay experience because you don't know what you're doing, even though you could actually know what you're doing, but because these people that are so critical don't know what they're looking at, they can't actually tell that you know what you're doing either. So a lot of stuff like that going on. Player mapper divide has a big thing in that, and that's actually one of the reasons I spent so long in tournament mapping. So
Definitely. I mean, the skill of like your playing skill does correlate to your mapping skill in certain ways, right? You got to have a decent enough playing skill to really understand what playing the map is going to feel like and do in order to map it. And so like I see these like rank 500,000 players trying to learn how to map, and it's just like you're really going to struggle because the highest difficulty you can play is a hard diff. Like
oh yeah.
you just don't understand the mechanics in the game well enough to even consider really mapping, honestly. Like as much as I don't want to push people away, it's like you gotta play the game enough to understand the mechanics of it first.
Yeah, and I mean you can compensate for this in other ways. So if you're just like
Definitely.
really good with game design, like Undead Capulet, right? Like you can just learn the mechanics and then use them, right? Like you can do that. You can also take that perspective. You can also watch players.
Okay, it's different for you, Nafi, okay?
Yeah.
Because again, like Halfslashed is saying, right? Like for the people obviously not in the Discord, Nafi just screenshotted her rank, which is 500,000. But the big idea is like Nafi has like 10 years of experience mapping, right? Like, and particularly modding, right? That's a really big one where you just understand how the game works from a sort of a theoretical level, right?
Yeah, like I still don't map extras because I have no interest because I'm not going to play them and I make my best to play them myself. But modern?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm chilling.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean, even then, like your play experience still matches the type of content you're making, right?
Yeah.
So there's no mismatch. The problem, and actually that's fine. The problem is that if there is no mismatch, and then you're trying to evaluate things that do have a mismatch or things outside your range, then and then you're also, if your attitude is also bad, that's where we tend to see most of the conflicts. Like for a long time, you couldn't map like high star stuff, or high star stuff would be disproportionately criticized compared to maps of like easier difficulty essentially that play the same way because of like that whole mismatch of this looks grotesque to me because I can't tell what's going on because my play experience doesn't match this. So you have that type of stuff going on.
Like if you're old enough, you remember that Miss You was like super controversial when it was ranked, and that's only a 5-star map.
Yeah. Well, you see, it had this funny thing of not being rated properly by the star rating system.
But still, it's so much easier than like so many other things it's inspired since then. But back when it was made, it was just absolutely insane. Of like, what are you doing?
And it wasn't even the first of its kind either. It's just that the ones that the maps that had those mechanics, a lot of people I think at the time were still attributing to this is when like back when the East-West tensions were really high and the dominant force of conflict in Osu. That there was like essentially the West was just chalking it up as it's just the fucking Eastern circle jerkers. They're pushing all this stuff and they're just doing whatever. But of course, it's like this whole lack of humility and understanding. They didn't actually see that they actually did know what they were doing, and they just kind of approached things differently. So, I'm very honestly, that's one of the things like it's like sidebar that I'm really glad that has gotten so much better. Like now we don't have that type of geopolitical like alignment in the fucking Osu. It's not anywhere near as prominent as it used to be. I'll tell you that. Like, it's probably does still exist, but it's not the dominant force.
I think it's more of like the way it exists now is I think you have like these mappers who generally sort of like or map in, I mean, for the most part, Western mapping is sort of homogenous, right? Like you're not really going to notice much of a difference between like a German map and an American map necessarily. But I think you still see some of those carryovers of like old Russian mapping versus old Chinese mapping. And those communities still sort of exist. But there's not really I don't feel like there's a big prejudice against any of them in particular, right? It's just like people have generally recognized that like they have different sort of stylistic choices, but they're all valid.
Yeah, my kind of take on that is the community still exists. However, as kind of like the mapping, like as innovation has stagnated in mapping, their styles have become closer. And again, because there's more sharing of techniques and stuff now. So and that is a healthy thing. So this is one of the positive parts of the stagnation. It reduces that conflict. So that because like you don't want the type of conflict. You don't want it.
Yeah, I mean, a big part. I remember like I know Pishyvat's done a couple videos on it on this kind of difference of regional differences and that sort of thing, and particularly Russian ones. And it's interesting sort of the ideas that people come up with. Like I know like some old Russian maps they did spacing emphasis in particular by going away from the sound rather than going to the sound like all the Western mappers do, which is like if you think about it, it's like that's a perfectly valid way of doing it as long as it's done consistently throughout the map, right? But nobody really does it because I think part of it is it doesn't really feel very satisfying. But it could just be that just what we're conditioned for. And I know talking to Uber Zolik, I've really come to recognize how impactful conditioning is in what the community does as a whole, particularly with like wide angles, right? Like Uberzolik is a big fan of wide angles, and he will attest that he finds them more comfortable than sharp angles, which just about anyone else you ask is going to disagree with that. And that's just because that's all Uberzolik plays. He just plays maps with tons of wide angles and doesn't play anything with sharp angles. And it's just like, well, that makes perfect sense, right? If that's the skill that you've trained, then that's what you're going to find comfortable. And so I always find that interesting.
Oh, yep. That's it's funny how those differences even came to be too. But alas, yeah, all that kind of to say, player mapper divide is, it still continues to be one of the issues. But I think it's going to be something that, it's not something that you can solve. Especially as the community grows, it's something you can kind of mitigate the side effects of, though. So
Yeah, I mean that's sort of part of the reason this podcast exists, is to give players a chance to interact with, well, I would say that most of us here, arguably I'm not, but Nafi and Halfslashed are pretty relatively large figures in the mapping community, right? And so putting ourselves out there to give those people who are not integrated in the mapping community a chance to have somebody to talk to about it. So that's sort of part of the purpose of this podcast.
dude, I just like the yap.
You just like the app?
The yap.
Oh, the yap, yeah. No, I like yapping too. Yapping's fun. I just remember like I think part of what inspired it was all the drama that happened in like December, January, February, and I was like, wow, it'd be really nice to be able to talk about this, because people really are so misguided that they really need to hear some perspectives that they just are not hearing. So then this thing was born. So
Yeah, like the simplest way to understand each other better is to talk to each other more. It's like, I think the average person, including myself, would be very, a very personal person, a very private person. But if a community is like continually growing in scale, or it grew rapidly in scale and then stagnated from there because like COVID, right? And you'll see now, like most players, they started during 2020, they stuck around, but they didn't start earlier than that, and not as many of them started later than that. Anyway, it's just kind of thinking about different and fun ways to kind of interact with each other that work for bigger sizes.
And it's definitely interesting, like how the meta was defined so much by COVID and what was going on just before that happened, right? I mean, like Sotarks is such a massive influence on the community, and all the insert all these other like sort of generic / like aim farm PP mappers, because that was what was getting ranked really predominantly in 2019, 2020, especially a lot of those anime maps that anime exploded in 2020 because of COVID. People came to Osu to play those songs, and then they played those maps made by those guys, and then they view this kind of style as the norm, right? Anything else that's not this is bad. And then they really like get good at that skill, and they don't practice the other skills that are really required to be a well diversified Osu player. So that's COVID had such a big impact on this game. It's kind of crazy. But yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think this might be a good time to start talking about some tournament mapping, though, now that we've talked about player mapping.
All the way through, right?
All the way. Well, sort of what I always find it fascinating talking to you about Halfslashed is, tournament mapping, especially because you have such a big background in that. And I know you were actually one of the sort of people that created the idea of slot pooling, used by just about every single tournament these days. And obviously not the only one who did it, but a really important early figure for it. And I know I have my own perspectives on slot pooling and what it does to mapping, but I was curious if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my experience, all right, so my kind of idea of slot pooling is when we were doing the monthly tournaments, we needed to get pools out every month. And so I'm like, all right, and I had this thing where I had a weird skill set because I got into all the weird reading stuff. And kind of the meta in 2015, 2014, 2015, 2016 was you just kind of put in songs you liked in the map pools and that you just called it good. However, this means that if you're just putting quote unquote bangers into the pool, then all those bangers are you're playing jumps, you're playing some streams, and maybe you'll have like one weird map. And I thought this is just like a unidimensional way to look at skills. So, so I thought, all right, let me try to actually test skill with my map pools. So I came up with this like a set of slots, and put a format together, and we started making pools off of that brought in a lot of variety, but of course it made maps a little harder to find. But since the stratas, this was just kind of to give more representation to things in the map pool. So, and so that's what I was doing in 2016. And in 2017, 2018 is when you start to see this getting deployed at scale. Because someone else, so people like Dada and Yanaro, figured out, or particularly Dada. So Dada is kind of like the godfather of slot pooling, in terms of the person that started to deploy this across many different tournaments, and really formalize the system. And he formalized it because he produced a guide to how to map pool. And so because he produced this guide, it got widespread, and everyone's like, yeah, this is a good idea. Because what it does is it makes pooling very simple. All you have to do is you have to find maps that fit a criteria, and then it works. So the problem is that this intersected with the dominant problem of my day of pooling, which was map reuse. So now you're essentially seeing the same maps appearing all the time in the pools, and this degrades pools because the idea is with pools you want fresh experience. Problem is, amount of tournaments was going up. Players started to get more and more invested into tournaments. They used to just be a thing you did for fun, aside from OWC, which has the stakes of OWC. But now everything is becoming a lot harder, and because now there's this variety in skill sets, there's a lot more pressure to perform on those skill sets. And so it's in general the stress that players endure has gone up in tournaments. And slot pooling is because like it is now that you're testing skill more, it's no longer a fun casual way to engage with the game. You're competing. You are now trying to optimize competitive integrity. And the problem with this is the problem that ended up happening is now you have the supply issue on the maps because to fill all these skill sets, you now need the supply. But mappers are not creating these maps to the frequency that they would need to sustain the formats. A good example of this is actually Nomad 5, which is the high BPM like speed slot. So like 230, 240, 250, 260 BPM songs are uncommonly mapped. And it's because those songs are rare. 2, those songs are niche. 3, those songs they're uninteresting to map like at a fundamental level. Like they are, and then it's like 4, I guess, if you are copyright aware or do not want to infringe on like stuff. A lot of these songs are made for rhythm games, so you have the rhythm game songs. You got like otherwise it's like rhythm games, breakcore, metal, and it's like those are some very unpopular genres to map. So huge supply side issue that slot pooling kind of created in this regard. But yeah, so yeah, that's kind of where I'd say slot pooling came about. Yeah.
Very cool. And what is your perspective on like mapping to slots? Because that's what happened. Is like you were talking about there. Like there's a supply side issue. So what's ended up happening over the last several years is obviously map poolers have, particular Corsace and the other ones, Perennial, have obtained custom mappers to map to that specific slot, and that kind of approach of making maps only for that slot and specifically for the purpose of fitting that slot, my perspective is that it creates one-dimensional maps because they are designed specifically to cater to one specific skill with nothing else in it. And then those maps sort of propagate, and that style propagates, and then you get these kind of one-dimensional, arguably boring maps in, say, the ranked section and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so part of this is just in general, mappers, when they are doing something that they are not good at, they are going, if you say do this and then they go and do that, if they're not comfortable, they're only going to do that. So the one dimensionality comes from the mapper itself. If the mapper is experienced and liberties are allowed, then they will still create a map. So I'm going to link this map here from Kite. So this would fit in the No Mod 5 slot. It's a very fast song. It's one of those fast songs. If you look at the map, you notice this doesn't look like what you would expect. What has been shown to be quote unquote No Mod 5. It's not generic. It has some not straightforward elements, but it still fulfills the criteria of the slot. Now, in 2020, 2022, you started to have these issues where this was just, you could never map this in the No Mod 5 slot because the meta expectations were such that you can't put tricky reading stuff into a No Mod 5. You can't put tricky reading stuff, you can't put too much aim, you can't do any of this. And this is the problem of slot pooling, where it created people took it too literally instead of using it as a guideline to form pools. And custom mapping made this worse because now you have mappers making things to the spec. And if they're making things to the spec, but they don't know how to do that, they only meet the spec and they forget to actually make their own maps. So I'd say that it's kind of an issue. There's two places where you can get issues to create those one-dimensional maps. One of them is the mapper themselves. They only know how to do one thing, and now that you've taken them out of their comfort zone, they are now making something they don't know how to make, and so they only make it at its worst. So you have that issue, and then the second one is from the pooler side. Poolers are restraining things. They're trying to contort the map into a certain form, so they're trying to fit the map into a certain box. So you can have both of those issues, or only one of them, and both of them will lead to the same result. So it's going to depend tournament to tournament. At Corsace, because we were kind of mapper dominant from the beginning, we did not have this as much. There was some of this while I was running it, because admittedly I didn't fully understand the implications of slot pooling to the degree I did until after I finished having full control of the pools from the start up. We didn't have this issue as much in 2020 because the expectations were put onto something that was already formed, since we were actually still pooling with the concepts of 2018 in mind, where people weren't as strict on the meta. So Kite actually set us up for success in that, because we did kind of nod towards the slots, but we didn't actually force everything into that. 2021, we did a lot more forcing of the things into the slots, and so you started to see more limitations, and then we started running into the problem of course, the mappers were making things to the spec, but they were not making maps that they actually wanted to make. So, yeah. So that's kind of where the dimensionality. The TLDR of that is maps can meet the slots without becoming one-dimensional, but it is up to the mapper, and you need to have the support of the poolers to do so.
Definitely, and I think that the benefit and the curse of the slot pooling was that it was very easily replicatable, right? And it was a formula, right? That was kind of the idea, and it's made it so that unskilled poolers and unexperienced poolers can create these sort of cookie cutter pool using the same idea, but without really having the fundamental knowledge of mapping or pooling to back that, right? And so they view the slots as a rigid thing rather than something that is just kind of guiding their choices for testing specific skill sets.
Yeah, but you even have that problem on the other side, where the poolers don't care, they just expect the mapper to figure it all out. But they don't know that the mapper doesn't know how to design to the game. So
yeah.
So you have the problem coming. There's so many ways, so many things that have to go right to get good custom maps, let alone a good custom pool.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's not really an easy way to solve that, I would say, probably, right? And I know Data has like a critique, a pretty long one, sort of talking about that. And obviously, I know you know we haven't really read it necessarily, but what are your thoughts on? Do you think that the slot pooling is a problem overall, or does it just need to be like modified to fit, or to? You think it's even a problem in the first place, right?
Okay, so again, like let's go back to 2018. So 2018's problem was, or just like in general, earlier eras of map pooling's problem was people were just putting in the bangers and they were not considering skill. 2020's problem was that people were only considering the skill and then they essentially were not caring about making things fun. Like modern era is, it's done a lot better in both of these regards. A couple of things have had to happen. One, player expectations. They needed to stop going up. The problem is that these expectations kept going up, 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 up. Because the stress of performing in these tournaments went up, 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 up. The stakes started to go up. Prizes started to get crazier. Like everything just started to get. And so the thing is, when players are in this position, they are they're lashing. They usually lash out because of these stressful circumstances. So that's one thing. As players, as you start to get a better culture for the players, like as when they stop complaining as much, essentially, and just start treating staff members with respect, that reduces that basically now means that poolers don't have to endure as much stress themselves, because usually they'll get the stress from either coming from the host that listens to the players, or they'll get it from the players themselves. And so then they don't now have to constrain mappers as much. And so mappers can now have a bit more freedom on stuff. As far as the slots, I have made essentially my idea for fixing this in 2023 was let's just stop this trying to remove aim from things and just assume that aim is a given. Uh, Essentially that it eliminates a skill, which it eliminates the aim skill because it assumes that you need it for everything. And I thought that this was the healthiest way, because what you find the most is with these slots is a lot of the focus is on removing aim, because it's not on removing reading, because that reading is going to be present in only a few things anyways, since it's not a natural component of a lot of maps. Um but making aim as something you can expect in some form in every different thing, where it's more prominent in some maps than others, I think was going to be a big one. Like, however, this was controversial because it in some ways it eliminated a category of maps. Like now you no longer had the quote unquote comfortable stream map or the comfortable aim map or whatever, because now you had some weird stuff going on in these maps. And personally, for me, I thought this was fine. And I think honestly, a lot more players are okay with this than they want to realize, but they still think it's a problem because the status quo says that you need to have a basic game map and you need to have a basic stream map. And forcing these maps that are that limited is is a huge problem. Forcing, for example, the Nomad Fives to look like the same map every time, just on a different song, or like the Nomad 2s to do the same, like that is the type of stuff that is the problem with slot pooling. If we can look at slots as guidelines again instead of as iron laws, then pools would start to require more all-roundedness in general, which also, by the way, pisses off some of the players because now they can't run the same team comps that they used to. So they can't run things with specialists as much because they don't get rewarded as much, since now your speed players need to be able to aim, your aim players need to be able to tap. Like it's just all this stuff going around. So it's complicated, basically.
Yeah, I mean, changing the status quo is never gonna be easy, no matter what you do, really.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's like there has to be a standard bearer. Somebody's got to go and put this forward. I tried to do that, and I got backlash from every direction, including my own people. So that's what that gets you. It can work, but boy, you better be willing to take those consequences. So
Mhm.
Yeah. And what's your sort of perspective on mapping? Sort of like fundamentally, when you're mapping for a tournament, your priorities are shifted. Like normally, I think most mappers their priority is sort of on representing the song in a way that they think is fits, right? And then, but when you're tournament mapping, you're creating a skill set that's required to play the map, and that's your number one priority there, right? Regardless of what it has to do with the song necessarily. And I was curious what your thoughts on that are.
oh, very simple. Pick your songs appropriately. Most of all the skill set stuff is really just a factor of the song. And so certain songs that you map are just not going to be as like they're not going to be as much of a banger as something else. So, for example, if you like songs that have huge varieties of intensity, you are going to make a terrible tournament map. Terrible map if you try to make a tournament map out of it, because the ideal tournament map has a much flatter intensity curve. Rhythm game music is an example of this. A lot of this is intense pretty much all throughout, with a couple with pretty light on the calm sections usually. But so if you pick the song like that, there is going to be a limit to how expressive you can make that song, because the song is just not built for that, right? And that's okay. Like, that music is still good. You can make lots of fine maps from this. Like, there's lots of mirror maps, lots of real lazy maps, lots of devious panda maps, etc., that I consider all very good, even if they're not maximally expressive. And that's kind of what you're aiming for. That's the type of map that you're going to make. Like, you're going to make something solid, competent, representing the song, fitting the skill set, all of that. You can hit all of that if you pick your songs properly. If you do not pick your songs properly, you've got a disaster coming. So really, it's like mapping the song and mapping the skill set will be the same if you are mapping the correct song. If you do not, again, I cannot stress this enough. Like, if you map the wrong song, or you do not know how to map that, or you don't know how to map that song, you're going to make a terrible map.
Yeah, that's probably my biggest pet peeve is people mapping like these really, really expressive songs for tournaments and then creating like a really not very expressive map as a result, because they're limiting themselves to creating a tournament map, right? And it's like you can choose that, but if you're going to use it for a tournament and you're going to limit your expressivity, or sort of have like a really flat difficulty curve for a song that really doesn't have a flat intensity curve, well, then you're just not really mapping the song. And that is sort of the number one no that you can't make that error if you're mapping. It's gonna make a bad map.
Yeah. Again, it's also like the mapper could just suck, and maybe they just got lucky, or they can only do one thing, and if you're doing not that thing, then they are just failing to branch out. So, yeah, there are cases where tournament mapping has ruined mappers, and I think that when this happens, it's usually that the mapper is uncomfortable doing what they are asked to do, and or they yeah, it's usually that, and or the mod they it was modded out. But like, some of these mappers were just not good to begin with. They thought they were better than they were, or other people thought that they were better than they were, and then they just, like, when you put them on a stage, they just don't work. Or maybe they just cannot map these songs. Like, maybe they just don't want to map these types of less intensity varying songs. And then tournament mapping is just not for them. And that's fine. Like, or oh yeah, here's another one. They are not fundamentally designing that experience. That tournament mapping is catering to. So I started talking a lot with in Nixa's server. We have a server that we share, and I started like doodling some ideas of like, what kind of game are you designing when you're making a map. And so I have there's 3 games, and you can kind of think of every map has intention in these directions to certain proportions. You have the arcade proportion, the arcade axis. You have the indie axis, and then you have the I called it graphic design, but it's really the spectacle axis, where it's like the arcade axis is how much a map intends to put gameplay elements as the focus. The indie axis is how much the map intends to provide a certain experience, and this includes song representation, and then the spectacle axis, which is how much the map intends to appear, how much the map intends to express visual appeal. So on your maximum for your arcade axis is like stream practice and or jump practice like type of maps. On your extreme for indie is something like a UC map, and or like a 4N3C map. I forgot their new name, Killa, something like that, something like that. And then for the spectacle is something like Mayday, right, where the entire point is again Mayday or an Aspire map or something like that. These are the closest things you can get to caricatures for those axes. Every map has certain proportions of these. And when you are doing a tournament map, it's going to be primarily arcade dominant because gameplay elements are the focus. There is a limit to how much you can get on the indie experience, and this will be capped out by the song you take. And then essentially the spectacle element, it's neutral. Like that's just going to depend on the mapper. Some maps like Lucent's Hina map, the one with the spinning and stuff. I forgot the name of it. It's the Iosis song, but that one had a lot more spectacle than I think anyone really expected. But it was still very much a tournament map, right? And it was still, yeah, things like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. And it's not all encompassing necessarily, but that's a pretty generally applicable sort of perspective on, the different axes that you can fall within mapping.
Well, it's more, again, it gets better as a tool when you think of it as answering one question of like, why does this map exist, right? And because it's literally just answering that question, rather than telling you really anything about the map. It's literally just telling you about the intentions, the design intention.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Cool.
So, the past couple of years, when it comes to tournament mapping, there's like all these issues of trying to fit like different kinds of maps into the slots, right? And like which kind of dynamics they're going on, like you were mentioning. I've seen this development on a couple of different places, but there's also been a huge increase of like people getting completely original songs for some of these things too. How do you think that's been kind of working out or really happening?
Okay, so this is part of the production value arms race that's been going on in tournaments. So, once upon a time, OWC was the pinnacle of production value. Then came Corsace. So what ended up happening is Corsace, being the passion-driven project that it has been, they did not stop at the limits of production, especially since we had this amazing designer named K2. I'm sure you've heard of him. He does OWC. He's done OWC stuff, and he is the design brain behind Corsace. And part of this, of course, gets brought on by Vinxis and Cavo Boy. So again, like principles of Corsace here. So it was not good enough. They wanted to beat OWC. Not because they wanted to like OWC was to be beaten or anything. They just wanted to make Corsace as good as possible. And so what ended up happening is the custom song stuff. OWC got the first custom that like on like a large stage with OO parts. So this was a Relazy and Mir collab. They got to collab this custom song by Camellia. It was really cool. And so then now that when OWC starts something, it tends to spread. So now that OWC put out this custom song, other tournaments we're also going to try to get a custom song to compete. Especially if you can make a better custom song. So notably, there were a lot of production issues with the creation of the custom song for OWC. Like essentially they had the whole issue where the Pitchy Fat, I think, has a video where he interviews Mango Miser on the topic of how it went wrong. But basically, Camellia was making a song for the Taiko people. Then the Taiko people like screwed stuff up, and then Camellia was asked to make a song for Standard World Cup instead, and then had to rush compose something. So it's not as good of a song as it could have been as a result. But yeah, Corsace ended up coming out with a custom song from Katagiri in 2021. And now that kind of said, okay, it's not just an OWC thing. Community tournaments can do this too. So we started to see a lot more presence. When tournaments like the Perennial started up, they started also introducing custom songs. They got I think in 2022 they got one by Undead Corporation, which was insane. So it's called The Throne, I think. And in general, you started seeing it spread out. Roundtable got custom songs. Custom songs have just become more and more of a part of things. Corsace was trying to spread this as well. So partially by having like Vinxis compose some of his stuff. That was part of the start. Like we had one of his songs in 2021. But then 2022 we scaled that up, got all the tiebreakers custom and a couple extra things. Corsace closed at a custom song, like, and then it just went from there. And now it's like it's a thing. So usually it's like we'll coordinate with smaller artists, or like less known artists that essentially they're not super expensive to commission. They're not the big names like Red Alice, who you have to pay like $5K just to even like hear your audience or whatever. And there's something that's relatively affordable for tournaments that are big enough to raise community funds. It's like Corsace. So yeah, that's kind of how the custom song stuff started. I don't interact too much with this as like because I used initially I like my interaction with this as a pooler has basically been to say kind of what I want. And then someone else will take it over. Like in the Corsace case, I worked a lot with Serenhide, aka Kibo, who kind of managed all this stuff for me, so I didn't have to think about what the songs were doing. As long as I just had to bug him anytime the songs didn't come on time. So
That makes it easier.
yeah, I mean it's good because he knows music, he cares about music, he loves music, and I'm like, great. You can do that. I just care about is this going to give me the map I want? And it's like, again, we talked about how the song choice is important for this. So it's like, all right, well, if you have the map and you have the mapper, then you get the right result. And it has worked consistently. Like, if we don't have that, then we pick the wrong mapper. It's usually not the song's fault. The songs are always really good. They are always fitting what we expect. Like, everything's good. There's many things that can go wrong in this, by the way. Part of what was making the earlier custom songs too bad is they interfered too much with the artist's creativity. This is a common theme. The more you impede the artist's path, the worse result you're going to get, no matter what you do. So you have to do this alignment as you have to take this known quantity and match it with this known quantity, and you have to string that along, and that's how you actually get good results. If you try to mold any of those quantities, you're probably not going to understand enough about it, so you're going to break something. So avoid breaking things. Try to use what already exists.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Using those resources is important, and not limiting the artists creates better things.
Mm-hmm.
I think we see that in like mapping as well, as like the more you restrict mappers to a specific like pool or slot or idea that they have to meet, the worse of a map that they end up creating.
Yeah. It's usually like a nice surprise where it's like you get asked to do something you kind of wanted to do anyways. But except that shouldn't be a surprise. That should be the expectation. Like you as an artist getting a commission, it should be something you wanted to make. You as a mapper being asked to make a custom map, it should be something you wanted to make. Like it's that, like, if you want any creation to work seamlessly, that's how it has to work.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway,
my experience with it is so weird and fringe because I just make storyboards for like the World Cup sometimes and stuff. So it's not just limited to Osu, but I get to like see how they organize like some of the outside layer of organizing, like for all of the other game modes too. It's kind of wild.
Definitely. I think Halfslash made an interesting point earlier where, in the other game modes it was they're small enough that the good mappers also tend to be good players, and for standard, mapping is so complex that you don't really have the ability to become a good player and a good mapper at the same time, right? You got to kind of specialize. So that was a really interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. And like when it comes to like the customs I see for other game modes, you'll see like a lot of the same mappers again and again and again and again. And it's like it's a good thing because at some point it's like you know what they're doing, and the audience knows what to expect. Like we're getting a custom map from this person for this kind of song, and that is really exciting kind of thing. On the other hand, it's like interesting a bit, at least on a storyboarding perspective. Because normally when I would storyboard, I would just make it on the assumption that there's weirdos like me that played way too much Project Diva and are used to having their eyes seared out while trying to focus on the notes at the same time. That I just make whatever I want, and then some players will complain that their eyes got bleached or something like that, or sun glazed, and I'm just like, yeah, you have background in for that. Don't worry about it. But like,
yeah, it's by design.
But then on the other hand, for like tournament ones, sometimes they're leaning even more into like that kind of spectacle. But the schedule's always really tight because that's kind of like one of the last things that gets done compared to like having the song, having the mappers lined up, having the basic OSZ made, and all that kind of stuff. It's just like it's always kind of interesting to work with.
Well, it's difficult. I feel like generally you're not going to make the storyboard before you make the map, right? Because it may not fit. So it's kind of just got to be the last thing. But
yeah, that's what you would think. But I don't usually have the map, so I just have to. I have to pray.
Oh, really?
I get but like they'll have like the graphic designers or like the illustrators and everything that I get to work with, so that's pretty cool.
So yeah, I think do we have any further comments on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I think check out the Dada critique if you want some more insight into it. It was worked on by not just Dada, but also Nyanaro, Miles, and Chiv, all of which are preeminent poolers. So Dada and Nyanaro are also mappers too. So it's not like they understand what's going on. Mappers, players, like they are tournament people, like just as I am tournament people. It's the same deal. But yeah, that's also I think they're all involved in the World Cups too right now. So
yeah. Yep, that's definitely what they're doing. But I don't know too much about that stuff. I haven't really ever had interest in tournament mapping because I'm like, I don't want to map songs that I'm not interested in. And unfortunately for me, I like the songs that are very expressive with high highs and low lows, which is just not compatible.
ain't nothing wrong with that.
Uh-huh. Which is unfortunate because a lot of Vocaloid has especially the older ones are fairly flat intensity curves, but they're just not interesting to map. So
yeah, it's kind of like so that's also for a while we weren't seeing too much Vocaloid. People I think started pushing, they wanted to see more Vocaloid, so then more Vocaloid started appearing, but I feel like for that this is where Toho stays winning, it's like you want to map for tournaments, there's so much Toho stuff that's just perfect for this, like
yep. Yeah, I mean, I think of like Toho as like the actual game, and it's like, yeah, it honestly feels like it's very fitting.
Well, to be fair, it is, but because those songs are so hard to map, that also limits them. Like now, people have realized, oh wait, we can just map insane diffs for this, and now it's not as hard to map. So now you start seeing like some of those in the DT slots, but it's like extra stuff. That's my business. Like I don't see too many people contesting me there. So
definitely. Yeah. So if we want to talk some more, I was thinking that, especially because we have quite a few viewers, I feel like we could end the conversation, especially because we're talking about like your journey in mapping Halfslashed. Maybe we could talk a little bit about, if you were starting mapping today, what would your approach be in terms of getting better, right? How would you pursue getting better?
Okay, hold on. Let's not talk about how I would do it, because I would do it wrong if I was starting with no knowledge, like none of that. How I recommend people is a different one. Okay, so my experience has been that if you want to get better at mapping, you cannot do this alone. So fundamentally recognize that you cannot improve at mapping without peer feedback. Um, so you want to get into mapping and you do not know anyone in mapping, priority one, start meeting people that are into mapping. And ideally, you find someone or several people that are actually all into it and they are actually all like making things, and you will get positive feedback loops starting. So in mentorship, for me, prior to mentorship, my window for this, again, Daramok. Cannot stress enough like how my interactions with Daramok were the reasons why I even got anywhere in mapping. Because me and Daramok were going back and forth, and he was better than me by quite a bit because he'd spent more time in it, but he was still willing to map with, even collab with me, right? And then it's like in another server, like I joined some image dump server or whatever, and I met people like Blissful Yoshi. Blissful Yoshi helped me kind of get into mapping, as he probably helped many other people up to that point. KTG Stir, etc. Like they were all in that server. And so that helped me until I got to mentorship, but I wasn't getting very far until mentorship, where I started to actually that's when I met like Mir, LMT, Mun, like Yaspo, like Ice Cult, like Defiance, like all those people. Like they are just that when you meet those people and you are now having these feedback cycles, that's when you actually start to improve like crazy. So there's a mapper that you may or may not have heard of named Deca. That I still remember. It was just him and Impure Pug. They were just roasting the shit out of each other. And that's how they got better. So it was like they all had like some small group and they just mapped. And that's how it works. Like you don't get better unless you have like those peers with you that are also in the grind. Ideally, the skill disparity isn't so high. Like the problem is like if I wanted to help someone get into mapping now, I would be the worst person to do so because I'm so far away from that point. Like spent I've spent 8 years in this game, like 8 years mapping. 8 years mapping. That is an insane amount of time that almost no one has spent. But alas, like that's a long period of time that really separates your experiences. So you want people that are kind of like within like a year or so of experience, like active experience of mapping with you. So if for example someone is just ranking their first map and you're just starting, that would actually be a pretty good person to hang around with. But even then, not for very long, because if you for example stop making maps as much, and they keep grinding like crazy, then pretty soon they're on the like second or third ranked or whatever, and like they've actually gotten the skills to get to that point, and they're farther away now. So that's basically it. It's just try to get into it around people that are also into it, at the same level.
Yeah, it's kind of. I think you make an interesting point there, but being at the same level, because I do think that's important. Because I definitely don't think I could, like, sure, at our experience levels we can mentor somebody, but we can't really motivate them in the same way that somebody else at their same level can, as like a peer. And that's really, really important. The motivation is like the number one thing that is going to determine if you make it big or if you quit before you get anywhere, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and it's like this isn't like you still do need expert opinion input in the way in some way, but I just think that in the past you kind of had to learn this all from someone on the game, like you'd get but now it's like there's all these like Pishyfat's resources are covering a lot of that role of like what the expert thing is. Obviously you can get those you should get those clarified with someone that is like that you do look up to if you can, but it's things like having those resources. It's things like having all these guides. Like all this information is out there. And then, but you need to have someone with there in the trenches as well, because like unless you're just like so insanely hooked on mapping, and then it's like you don't need any of this advice anyway. Just like lock it and do what you're gonna do, right? Like, but even then, those people still need peer feedback. They need feedback on what they're doing because ultimately, it's like it's still all the things that make maps good are still socially constructed. So
Yeah, definitely. Like networking is really big, and really that's the main value of like these bigger servers, like mentorship and other things where you can actually network with people, right? It's not so much getting the mentor necessarily, but it's putting yourself in a place where if you have the drive and the motivation and sort of the people skills, right? You can't be terrible to talk to because nobody's going to want to interact with you at that point, right? But if you go in sort of eager to learn, you're going to learn. So
oh yeah, yeah, that's pretty much I'd say the biggest one of getting into it. Just find people.
yeah, and sort of my I guess I should say, like, Nafi, do you have what's your opinion or advice on how to get better at mapping if you were doing it today in 2024?
You know what? Sometimes I want to abandon my whole identity and start over.
I feel that.
Because my mapping hit a really hard plateau a while ago, and I just try to chill and enjoy it. But at times it's really frustrating because I don't have any peers that are in quite that same scenario that wouldn't be scared by who I am. So it's just like, can I just be a noob? Thanks.
Ditch symmetry. Okay, thanks.
Anyway,
it's time to make a Smurf account.
I already did. I don't have symmetry. Anyway,
all right. No, we'll rebirth you as a Toho mapper. It's fine. I got you.
Maybe, but like
we can't lose a Vocaloid mapper.
Like, no,
we're already so limited.
You don't understand. I can fix her. I can do this.
No, we need the Vocaloid mappers, the Vocaloid army.
But I think the most important thing is to be open-minded and not put your focus on ranking things. Just put your focus on making things, and being able to be social, interact with other people. Because sometimes people are just not good at socializing, and that can really limit them because they won't be able to really talk through feedback as much as somebody else that's a little bit more able to do that might be able to. I remember when I started, it was like all on mod help. So it was like literally, you would open the game, you would open a chat channel in the game, and you would just have all these people shooting the shit about all these maps in the game. And nowadays it's like so spread across like all the discords that usually I link people a couple of discords and I'm like, I recommend you try out joining these. And then usually I just pray that they can find their own way from there.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to like as an NAT or as a BN, you definitely get like these new mappers like DMing you for feedback because we do have more sort of apparent authority on mapping, and we're also much more visible than the average mapper is, and so you definitely get people asking for feedback at things, and that's actually one of the things that the NAT look for in BN applicants, is that they trust that they would be a good person to give that kind of feedback. But it's difficult to give quick feedback to somebody who, one, is likely not even going to continue, but how can you set them up for success in terms of being able to continue learning on their own? Because like realistically, BNs, NAT, they don't have the time to babysit a new mapper, right?
Mhm.
You know, the return on investment is the amount of effort that it takes to guide somebody through mapping is very high, and very likely it's not, frankly, unlikely that mappers continue, right? Like the vast majority of mappers just start, realize that it's a huge investment of time, and then they quit, right? And so I try to give them the resources to continue on their own without, constantly needing my assistance. Not that I don't like giving assistance, but it is what it is, right? But it's difficult to do that. So, because everyone's all spread out, there's not really one place, and you can give them the pitchy fat videos, right? But the pitchy fat videos are fairly generalized. And there's certainly different perspectives on that, right? Some people think that they're terrible, and some people think that they're pretty good places to start. So.
And like the most common thing I see from like watching those videos is that when you're hearing it and when it's being fed to you, it's like, okay, I understand it. I understand everything I'm being told. And then you open the editor and you can't execute it because you don't have that practice of like actually
it's
making those patterns exist.
Completely different. Yeah, it's completely different. The way I approach the Pitchy Vet videos is that they give you enough background of like the terminology and the concepts that when you actually get feedback from somebody, it'll actually make sense, because realistically most mappers are not going to take the time to define every single terminology that they use. Like if you don't know what a 1-1 gap is, then you're really going to struggle getting feedback from just about any mapper, because if they have to take the time to explain what a 1-1 gap is, and then explain what a double is, and then explain what a triple is, you know what I mean? Like these basic terminology things, it just makes everything take so much longer, and it's much more time consuming. So I like to use those Pitchy Fat videos as a way to introduce like the basic concepts of what is contrast, what is emphasis, what is some of the editor shortcuts that you can be using. What do we call the different rhythm gaps? Like these really basic ideas. So that frankly, a lot of us more experienced mappers don't really think about, because it's just so intuitive to us nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
But if I think back to 2020, it's like when you first learned to map, like of course you don't know, right? You don't know what the difference between a white tick and a red tick is, and why they're different, right? You're just like, oh, they're different because you can't have 4 white ticks right next to each other, because then it's going to be difficult to identify, right?
I remember when I started mapping, I literally could not hear drums in songs because it was never something I thought about before. I would just listen to the song as a whole, maybe the melody of the singing. It made timing so much harder until I figured out what drum beats were.
Yeah.
And then it all clicked, and I was like, oh my goodness, I can actually time songs now. I know what to time to.
Yeah,
and
like
it's not something people ever consider explaining. They're just like, hey, here's the fixed timing for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you'll hear people say like, just follow the drums or just follow the vocals, and it's like, what does that even mean? How do you just follow that, right? And these are things that we really do take for granted, and a lot of it comes with experience, right? Like it's not something that like you can't just like all of a sudden be told to listen to the drums and then like, oh, I got it, I'm listening to the drums now. It's like you actually, as the mapper, you have to take the time to really sit there and really digest the song and try to break it up into its individual components, and then ideally try to at that point start recognizing patterns across the song, right? Like, does that melody repeat later, right? If it does, the song does it intentionally, right? You think of like song structure, like these things repeat across large swaths of the song, and your map should do that too. And that's something that that it's sort of like object permanence, right? But for mappers.
Yeah.
I mean, object permanence is actually something else entirely with mapping, where new mappers won't think about where they had just placed a circle, and then they'll reuse that same spot in the playfield.
This is why
that's like another common error.
Yeah, this is
that's
why
not
the
just
old
new
people...
mappers.
Yeah, that's fair.
But this is why the old default of having hit animations turned off was actually better. Because you could actually see more.
Wait. That's not the default anymore?
No, hit animations are...
They're doomed. They're fucking doomed.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have the hit animations, so it leaves them on the playfield a little longer, so it's a little easier to
visualize,
not accidentally put stuff where you just put it. And it might be a little conservative, but because like it's just rules of thumb, right? Like you can totally break the rules once you kind of understand why they're there. But
well, I mean,
yeah.
Fundamental to making good maps is the ability to understand where your objects have been through the entire thing.
Yeah.
Because then you can actually start conveying like contrast in so many more ways than just spacing, for example. So
yeah, I feel like these days some mapping discussions are way too focused on like literal spacing. It kind of like takes away from looking at other aspects of how all these patterns and objects come together.
Well, that's been the focus for essentially the past like decade. Like my entire time in OSU that's been the Discord. The Discourse, it's because it's just easier, and so people start with what they can describe, which is why I say like a lot of mappers don't have no fucking clue what they're actually doing. Like a lot of them are just like, yeah, we just made it look like this other guy's he's the famous one, and it's like, okay, well, you know, like how much do you actually understand here?
Yeah, it's definitely an issue sort of across the board. And I think a lot of it is like people just don't spend the time to like listen to the song, right? Like you just go in, start placing circles. Like, no, you got to actually sort of start recognizing the patterns in the song, because the songs are designed with a structure, and your map should structurally mirror that. Now, how you do that is up to you, obviously, but that's like the number one thing. Is like you can't take two sections that are exactly repeated, like chorus 1 and chorus 2, and they do something completely different, right? With chorus 2, like they're gonna be very, very similar.
Sometimes it's just a vibe.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? But you know, you gotta have some kind of consistency, some carryover.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of, that was sort of like the critical advice for what like a new mapper would need to do, right? To learn.
Learn how to scroll back and forth on the timeline. That'll be your step 1.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much on the actual like stuff, because I mean, frankly, I could talk about details all day long and none of it's going to be immediately helpful. But yeah, literally just find the people. That's what you need to do.
Yeah, definitely. And map more, right? That's the most dumb sort of advice, but it is true. You just got to map more, right? And copy other maps.
There's a limitation to mapping more.
Yeah.
So the limitations are, if you're not getting feedback, aka you need people for feedback. So you need to find the people so you can actually have feedback for mapping more, and it actually helps. And also mapping more, like just in a vacuum, is only going to improve your workflow. So you'll be able to make decisions faster, but it's not going to help you make better decisions in the future to make better maps. So
yeah, you got to do a little bit of everything, and you know, but the thing is, like, you have to do the mapping more with the other things, right? You can't just map more by itself. And you can't just find the environment. You can't just find the people, because if you don't create content for them to give you feedback on, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, like I remember when I started out, me and Annabelle were like 2 peas in a pod, right? But like when we started mapping like the same time, but she got better so much faster than me because she was okay with making maps that were like perfect. And so she would make like maybe like 10 maps in a week or something ridiculous at her peak, right? And I was just over here like, I made one map. I tried really hard on it in the same amount of time, and I just did not get better nearly as fast.
Yeah, that is another thing. It was like, if you can, abandon the idea of creating a good map as a new mapper. Like, you're not going to create one, so don't even try. Just make a map.
Right.
I will say, in my experience, the people that I've seen that have gotten, they'll like get to like a good baseline fast, but they'll actually cap out. Like they plateau for longer. So like for example, I saw this with Mir for a while. Like Mir got really good because Mir had like some basic idea. Got lots of feedback. Mir accelerated to being able to make like pretty competent maps regularly, but then Mir was basically stuck for like 3 years because he wasn't as good as reflecting on his previous maps as he was, because it's like when you just completely abandon the reflective instinct and you don't come back to it, you lose what you need to actually get yourself to the next level. So remember that reflecting on your map to try to make a better map is a good thing, and that's what's going to help you once you already know how to make an okay map.
Mhm.
So just remember that.
Yep. Mapping is not easy, and have realistic expectations. Don't think that you're gonna learn mapping and get a ranked map in a month. It's gonna take a lot longer than that.
If you're lucky, you might be able to do it in 4, maybe. That's the fastest I think I've seen from 0 to ranked. But that ranked map's also going to be pretty shit. Like, so I mean, you can get a mediocre TV size from 0 to from 0, but I don't think you want that. If you want a good ranked map, it will take probably at least 8 months to a year. And that's if again you treat mapping like what it is, which is a very intensive hobby. And this is what you're focused in, like. It doesn't have to be all you think about, but you're spending significant portions of your weeks on this. So.
Yeah, and receiving feedback from good people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even receiving feedback from bad people is okay, as long as you eventually move away from those to seek people from the right people, because it's elimination, right? Like maybe you look into meeting I said meet people. But that doesn't mean you meet the right people right away. So you just keep meeting people until you do. And so you have to, each person that's an ill fit to show you where you need to go will reveal who you need to talk to. And eventually you'll get there.
Yeah.
You know what I think might be a little bit underrated in this conversation so far is like literally collaborating with other people on maps.
I don't value that one as much because realistically, most new mappers are not going to have the opportunity to collaborate with a more experienced mapper.
That's about like no, not like with a more experienced mapper, like one of their peers, and just like trying to meet in the middle, like actively think outside of like the own box that you're like making for yourself.
Yes, I agree. I do remember like collaborating early on in my history with Trito Bandito when he was newer as well, before he had ranked map, and it was interesting to have to try to adapt and understand a different perspective on mapping, right, from somebody who mapped differently.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps expand your sort of bubble. It's good.
And like that's kind of the idea that modding falls into too, is like trying, like we mentioned before, like trying to actually understand what other people are doing. But it lets you do that while actually practicing mapping.
Yep.
At least to some kind of extent.
Yeah. Now, sort of like what always comes up in these conversations is, obviously eventually ranking a map, right? And this is one of those conversations that gets beat around the bush, right? Like everyone's always talking about it, but do we think that ranking a map is a circle jerk? Are BNs out to get the new mappers?
No, that's utter bullshit. Oh, sorry, you asked. Nafi was the actual answer. I'm just saying it's bullshit. Go ahead, Nafi.
Nafi's NAT. Nafi's part of the problem, right?
Yeah. Let's hear.
They're repressing all the new mappers.
Let's hear from criminal scum Nafi.
I can't. I'm sorry.
Well, Nafi, like, isn't the ranking criteria specifically designed to prevent new mappers from ranking their maps? Like, if a BN dared, don't even get me started. If a BN dared to rank one, right? Because then they're gonna get, the NAT are gonna come down and veto the map, kick the BN, and then we have drama on Twitter.
Actually, sorry. The ranking criteria is designed to prevent PP maps from getting ranked clearly.
True.
Yeah, you'll see we made a new addition to the extra difficulty criteria. You're not allowed to have large vertical jumps. Sorry. No more streams either. Sorry.
Oh yeah, and if your space stream is longer than 9 notes, it's unrankable.
But wait, you're saying that you can even have space streams at all?
Yeah, they just have to be under 9 notes, and you have to have the last note have higher spacing than the rest of the stream, because then it's not PP anymore.
Well, I don't know if I believe that, because like on my last internal memo directly from the NAT, it says that no spaced notes can be happen, like no spaced 1/4 can happen at all. That's directly from the NAT.
My reading of that is actually you need more spacing changes. Like you can have it as long as it's frequent enough that it's all over the place. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I think there is absolutely a level of it being a bit of a circle jerk, because if you know the right people to ask, or even if you just understand different BNs better, like you know who to ask that would actually like the kind of map that you're making, versus if you just pick any random name from the list and they're like, I hate this kind of map, I'm never going to nominate it. It's a much different experience from if you actually know a bit of who's who. And that gets a bit harder when there's more BNs. But on the other hand, there's more BNs to ask.
Yeah.
So that's a double-edged sword sometimes. But the biggest thing I see new mappers run into is they copy their favorite kinds of mappers that they see getting ranked all the time. And as far as they can tell, they've made it just as good, but that's not the truth. And so the question becomes not like, why is this getting ranked and not mine, but like kind of comparing themselves, which I think is where some of that perception would come from sometimes, where you're stuck in like, this guy can get this same thing ranked, but I can't, and it's obviously exactly the same, so there's something else at play here. And that's just a bit of like that Dunning-Kruger effect sometimes, where you just can't see it. The other thing is, if you're totally unknown, it's a little bit harder to navigate just interacting with people, because some BNs are more likely to ignore you that way, or you just have to really, really try your luck. But for as long as the BNG is like a free volunteer group, I don't think that's exactly possible to change, but by having a lot of different BNs from like a lot of different groups, a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of different kinds of mappers in the group, it gets a lot better. Because like before, it was very focused on like modding a very specific way for very specific maps, and now it's more like, well, yeah, you still need to have the main basic skills, but the kind of map is, it just depends on your ability to actually look at it and check all those technical details more than style details, or just improve on what the mapper's doing. But that lets us have a lot of different mappers as BNs, which is pretty cool. But
and people are going to have to be okay with rejection, because there's like, I don't know how many, but I think over 100 standard BNs.
Yeah.
And you only need 2 of them to say yes. If you go and ask 20 for a nomination and they all reject you, there's still 80 BNs out there that you have to ask, right? So just because you get a lot of rejections, that's a given, in my opinion, right? You're going to get a lot of rejections if you don't know who to ask, right? But the chances are fairly high that just 2 BNs out there will, and once you get the first one, it becomes a little easier to get the second one, because you can ask that BN for a little bit of, feedback on on who else to ask, right? Because the BN is going to be a little bit more integrated in the community and know a bit more about who to ask usually. But you just gotta find those 2 BNs and that sort of like finding that needle in the haystack, and you just gotta ask them, right? You gotta ask when they open, right? So you gotta be okay with that rejection. Don't just assume that 20 people have rejected me, I'm never gonna get this ranked. it's very common even for experienced mappers to get through that same exact process.
I used to have to keep a spreadsheet of who I asked or not and like what kind of feedback they gave me, if any. It can definitely be really frustrating, and it puts a lot of people off of it entirely, which is why like
Definitely.
having some kind of other motivation towards mapping is really important. Otherwise, it's very hard to get past that really frustrating kind of stage.
Yeah, I always encourage people to map for the sake of mapping and like making a good map. And once you make a good map, the BNs will come to you, right? Like people will even ask you for the opportunity to nominate your map. Like I think that Halfslashed, his most when he's playing on the storyboard, I think I asked him if I could nominate it.
Yeah, that again, wild experiences. It is possible to get to that point. So
Yep.
it is a thing that happens. So,
Yep.
on the notes of rejection, all I have to point to is an initiative I think started a couple of years ago on the Mappers Guild site, where they were trialing BN Tinder. And this was actually an amazing name for it because it does describe kind of this process. It is kind of, you can get rejected for any reason at any time, and you have to throw your hopes into the void if you want to get like a BN, especially if you're just starting out. However, there are I want to address the circle jerking component because I don't think a lot of people understand how this mechanism works. So let me do it. BNs tend to, there's a couple of, many reasons that people want to be BNs at all. Rarely is it that somebody is there to, just shovel content into the ranked section, but more particularly they want to help maps along that they like, and or they want the status of doing that, because the status also helps you, because now you are a BN, you have status among other BNs, and thus is easier to ask other BNs. So that's one of the things. So the motivation part is important. The other thing is how circle jerks can kind of start to form. We talked about this earlier, where you meet people that you map with and you all get better. And naturally a step comes where you're all good enough. Sometimes what can happen is you're all good enough, you're all ranking maps, and then you're like, well, so what if one of us gets BN? And then now you start getting BN, maybe sometimes multiple people get BNs. They start wanting to do BN work together. And now you have a group of people that are all friends because they all started mapping and interacting together, and or they met other people along the way, and now they're all doing this BN thing together. So that's circle jerk formation. The other thing that you have is cases of where people learn to map from others. So this is kind of like a special case where people learn to map from others. They'll learn the basics, and eventually, like, what will happen is they stick around long enough, then they become BNs, and then they start helping the people that help them map by helping them rank their maps faster. This is another circle jerk way, and there is an exploitative component where I've seen, for example, a mentor that I will not name essentially start his BN farms years in advance, and he's reaping the dividends and has been reaping the dividends for years to come. And I've also seen the case where I've helped people along, and then they stuck around, they became helpful, like they became good mappers and BNs in their own right, and then when it's time for me to rank a map, they'll say, hey, like, I can help you. So things like that happen. So those are the circle jerk mechanics at play here. It's a long game. If the circle jerk it's a long game because essentially you're going through like persisting OSU cohorts. So realizing benefits of such a thing takes years. It does happen. It is not easy to happen, and it doesn't help, and it's not something you really concern yourself with, because you're having fun learning to map, right? And if you're not, then why the fuck are you here? So that's kind of what I have to say on the circle jerk part.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty good overview too.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, like there's some element of favoritism or circle jerking going on, but it's not organized by people who are like out to like get the new mappers or anything like that, right? It's just kind of a natural process of people spending years in the community, interacting with other people for years, getting those friends, and are you not gonna give your friends some element of favoritism, right? Like that's just how it is, right? And especially if those friends are much more likely to create good maps that you personally like, right? Because at the end of the day, bands are going to nominate maps that they like, and you're going to hang out with people that you generally like the maps of. It's kind of just the natural process. And so, yes, like when I look at my band requests, if I recognize the name of a mapper that I tend to like their maps of, I'm much more likely to look at their map and nominate it than somebody who I've never seen the map name of. And that comes back to getting your name out there, interacting in the community, and networking, right? It's a people game. It's not a single player game.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess if you want to combat, if you are envious of the circle jerk stuff, and you want to combat it, you can put it. You just have to be willing to put in the work to get to that point. And I've seen circle jerks like this fail in the past. Or I guess they've achieved different success. One I can think of is the metal circle jerk, Black Vultures. I think that was the one.
Yeah.
So like that one eventually got to the point where you had mappers that would kind of just nominate anything because it was just metal. But it had its day and then it didn't. Is kind of how that works. But the only reason why something like that didn't last was not just the transience of these groups, but also the amount of investment. Because when you try to build a circle jerk out of just entitlement without like capability, then it goes nowhere. Which is the other reason why being aware of the circle jerks is important, because if you make a name for yourself as a moron and circle jerks pick up on it, and the circle jerks interact with each other, your name gets passed around, and now you are the person to laugh at, because your persistence in put the way you have made yourself, the way you've painted yourself is not in a good light, and now a bunch of people know about this. So like when you interact with these groups long enough, like people will get shit talked because they are essentially doing things out of line and they don't respond to feedback telling them to turn it down. So people remember your name for not good reasons, and that's how that can hurt you. So in that sense, yes, that is how the circle jerks will screw you over. But otherwise, like just do your own thing, meet people that are also doing things kind of like that, and then eventually, like perhaps you'll be in that position where you had your own circle jerk, right? Like that's just how it works. It's not like it's not quite such that you're competing for limited spots like you used to be. So
yeah, and you can always like it's a struggle because like a lot of the discourse out there, like hating on the BN or hating on the NAT, is perpetrated by people who have never even opened the editor in their lives, and they just have no concept of how the system works and what goes on behind the scenes. And I pretty much guarantee that if you take the time to become a BN, you will do exactly what the other BNs are doing, right? Like you're going to give some element of favoritism to your friends, right? And if you are really, really active, like there's some BNs out there who nominate like 50 maps a month, right? And they probably don't have 50 friends making 50 maps a month, right? So there's going to be more opportunity for people who are not in that circle jerk to get there, but with that person, right? But realistically, it's still happening. Nobody is entirely non-partial, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
oh boy, interesting stuff.
It
That's all I gotta say.
never ends. It's the same conversation every year, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I think that's about all we have for today, though. We covered a lot. It was a longer episode. But I certainly appreciate Nafi and Halfslashed for joining me. And I appreciate all of you for watching. But we'll call this episode number 3 a wrap. And we'd love to hear your feedback on future topics, future guests, improvements. Let us know.
And thanks y'all for tuning in. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
See ya.